Michael, how you doing?
Hey, Edgar, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Hey, I'm back.
So,
I had to turn off the Wi-Fi in the hotel. It just wasn't working. So,
yeah, the challenge is, you do these Instagram lives, and you're kind of sometimes at the mercy of connections and stuff like
there you
that.
go.
So it gets a little bit scary. So, anyways, we'll try to get through it. While you were off, I talked about a couple of things that I wanted to kind of get out of the way and talk about some podcasts that we're going to be doing, having some of the cool girls in our industry. And then our live next week will be Tuesday. So Michael, just really quick as we jump in, and the guys are seeing you now, but they don't know who Michael is. So you're going to teach us everything about CalHypo. So maybe you could give us a quick little background of yourself, and then Sigura Water for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Michael Villegas. As you heard, I work with Sigura Water. We were formerly known in past lives as Lonza most recently. And before that, Arch Chemicals. The business itself has been in existence for quite a while. We made our bread and butter as the HTH brand for many years. Very basic in CalHypo. Produced quite a bit of the CalHypo in the industry in the United States. And then through the years, we've made some acquisitions, brought on some other brands that we sell both through distribution and through our dealer direct channel. And, so at this point, we're known as Sigura Water, and you can find us in distribution through brands like Applied Biosciences, GLB, Leisure Time on the spa side, one of the most recognized spa brands in the world. And then on our direct side, the Pool Life brand is our main pool direct brand, and Baquasil, Baqua Spa, and Brilliance for Spas would be some of our direct brands that we sell to the industry.
Okay, and then you have a boring product too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, once we're done getting through the CalHypo discussion, I'd love to at least introduce the borate product, and then, if we have time, we can do another Instagram live that delves a little bit deeper into the borate chemistry, and the different versions of borates that are out there, and what borate in the water does for especially service professionals.
Yes, absolutely. We definitely need to do that. So hopefully, if we have enough time, we'll talk about it at the end. If not, for sure, we'll do another Instagram live, and we will talk about that. We can also talk about it on the podcast. So
awesome.
What is CalHypo, and how is it different from the other chlorine products?
Yeah, so CalHypo, the short term is CalHypo. It's calcium hypochloride. So it's a mixture of calcium and the chlorine chemistry that when combined create the CalHypo product itself. So when we talk about different sanitizers and shocks out there, you mentioned dichlor and trichlor as kind of the go-to on the service side of the business, and a lot of that has to do with ease of use. Although CalHypo certainly just as easy to use. It's just kind of a sea change in terms of how you handle CalHypo and how you use it in residential or commercial water. But it gives you the same benefits that trichlor and dichlor do in terms of sanitization on a weekly basis, and in terms of dichlor versus CalHypo on the granular side as a shock, and getting that real boost of chlorine that you need to either get your chlorine breakpoint or just to give you an extra boost when it's hot out, especially in the peak of the season, or if you've got a plan for a heavy weekend usage. Maybe you're having a party or something like that, just like a dichlor shock would do. It's going to give you that nice boost of chlorine, clear out the pool as much as possible before use, and then slowly watch that level get down to where we want in that 1 to 4 part per million range. So very similar in terms of how you use it. It's just the different byproducts that you get from using CalHypo as opposed to trichlor, dichlor, in terms of CalHypo being non-stabilized as opposed to dichlor and trichlor, which we call our stabilized sanitizers and shocks. So there are some differences, but there are also some similarities in terms of how you use it as either a sanitizer or a shock.
Okay. And so how does CalHypo come in? It comes in granular powder. Obviously, we're going to talk about the tabs.
Yeah. Yep. So, there's different strengths, obviously, of CalHypo out there in a granular form. You can see some of the lower strengths that you're going to see in most of your mass outlets that require a lower percentage of strength in order to meet hazmat qualifications to be in big box stores like your Home Depots, your Lowe's, your Walmarts of the world, where they're more concerned about maintaining certain levels of hazardous materials in their stores, as opposed to say a distribution strength or a dealer strength, where we see 68% being the most prevalent in terms of your granular CalHypo shock. You'll see a 70%, you can see a 73%. And then, of course, within our direct brand, we carry the highest strength CalHypo out there, which is a 78% shock that is almost like a dichlor in terms of the dissolve rate and the look of the product itself. It's more of a powder than it is a granular, although it does come in a granular form. But the highest strength chlorine out there as far as the CalHypo that we sell not through distribution, only through our direct channel.
I know that CalHypo used to be a level 3 oxidizer, and now they've reclassified it to a level 2 oxidizer. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what that level 3 is, and then obviously level 2, and what are the differences?
Yes. So when you're talking about granular or a powder version of CalHypo, you're going to see that be more of a higher classification of oxidizer, so to speak. It's considered a 5.1 oxidizer, so it does have a higher class level. When we talk about the tabs that we introduced into the industry, about 4 years ago, those tabs we did as a class 2 oxidizer, and we did that for a couple of reasons. Number one, it makes it safer for storage in a backyard. It's obviously helping with some safety as far as storage in a warehouse if somebody's carrying lots of the product, and in a retail environment as well. As a class 2 oxidizer, it gives them retailer a little more flexibility to carry some of that product in there, but it still gives us the flexibility to have a strong sanitizer in a tablet form. So when we talk about class 2 oxidizer, we're talking more about our tableted version of the CalHypo that we introduced into the market a few years ago.
Okay, so is the powdered form also a 2?
No, not necessarily. No, your granular and your powder forms are going to be a higher classification. They're going to have a more, whereas a class 2 is a minimal hazard, and trichlor and dichlor are the lowest hazard rating. With most of your granular and powder forms, you're going to have a higher classification. It is going to require a higher level of storage and handling in terms of how you're making sure that you're properly handling and storing those types of products.
The types. Okay. And I see that Motor Bread joined on here. I'm going to tell his story because so he's a friend of mine that moved from California out to Texas. California market is very high on dichlor, trichlor, liquid. And we all know that different markets are different, but he moved out to Texas, and then everything out here in the Texas market is CalHypo. So everybody uses, the CalHypo. And I think at the beginning there was, obviously the concerns of some of the things that you hear with handling of the CalHypo, and that's the next thing that I want to get into. But this being such a market for CalHypo, and the cost of it being a lot more cost effective than the dichlor and the trichlor, which are kind of a little bit crazy out here. Yeah. He did research. He started handling the CalHypo and basically came back to me and said, "Man, I really just kind of did some research, found out about it, and I have absolutely no problems with the handling of the CalHypo." And so in the next question, that's something that I want to address for, some of those guys that are out there that I think you hear the stories about CalHypo, and we always kind of remember the crazy stories. But
sure.
Let's talk a little bit about the handling of the CalHypo and what are the best practices of handling CalHypo.
Yeah, so it's really about education with anyone who's making, who hasn't on a regular basis worked with CalHypo, and just the understanding of certain housekeeping that we want to do, making sure that if you're carrying around buckets of CalHypo and you're scooping out of those buckets and distributing CalHypo into your recreational water, that when you're taking the lid off and doing your scoops, that you're always making sure that you secure that lid when you're done with it, especially as you're transporting it throughout the day, in the back of your service truck. And then if you're using more of a 1 pound bag version of CalHypo, we always recommend, using the whole bag and not trying to, just use enough based on what the recommendation is for the size of the body of water that you're treating. We tend to want to stay away from carrying any open bags and raising the possibility of some exposure to that CalHypo. So it really is common sense in most instances with using CalHypo, as it is with any other chemicals that you're carrying in the back of a truck or storing in a retail space. It's making sure that everyone is trained up on the hazardous aspects of it, making sure that they're using common sense and not leaving things open or exposed to the elements where you might run into those issues. But like I said, CalHypo certainly has some of its characteristics where you really want to pay attention to storage and handling, but it's not unlike a lot of the other chemicals that we're working with on a daily basis, where it really is common sense and making sure that that you're handling it properly, that you're not leaving anything to chance in terms of something being exposed that might run into some issues. And that's just with the storage and handling, not to mention the aspect around the mixing of trichlor and CalHypo and the issues that you might run into with that. And as we're talking about people potentially having to find alternatives to trichlor and dichlor as the market gets crazy and crazier for those things, that's certainly something that needs to be understood as well, as where the issues are with mixing trichlor and dichlor with CalHypo in small enclosed spaces, especially as it relates to converting feeders over from trichlor use to CalHypo use, and how we try to steer away from those situations. It's because of the residual that builds up in a trichlor feeder, and how difficult it is to really get that thing clean enough to feel comfortable to convert over to trichlor or to CalHypo.
So let me ask you this, because Justin was talking about it the other day. Hopefully he's still on watching. So he is switching over to your CalHypo Tabs.
Okay.
But a lot of his pools still have those old tab feeders, because Texas is very big on building pools and then putting tab feeders in the pools. It's very common out here.
Right.
So if he wanted to switch his pools, and he bought a couple buckets of them and has started to switch over the pools that don't have the trichlor feeders, he's already switched those over using the skimmer-friendly ones. But what would you recommend to him with those old tab feeders that are there? Does he wait 4 weeks? Does he take them off? What is the recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if he's using the skimmer tabs already, then he's not incorporating those feeders in. But we always recommend just closing those things out, and switching away from using them whatsoever. And if the opportunity presents itself down the line, we have introduced within the last year or so an offline feeder that we use in conjunction with some tablets that we introduced at the same time we introduced the offline feeder. And these tablets have a sequestering agent in them. They can be used in either the skimmer or the offline feeder, whereas we don't recommend the skimmer only tabs to go into these offline feeders, because they don't include the sequestering agent that's going to help keep some of that calcium that's coming out of the tablets from coming out of solution and doing any scaling as it reaches the water, and you may have those fluctuations in pH where you see some of that calcium coming out of solution. So that sequestering agent that we added in the quote unquote version 2 of these tablets help with that combination of an offline feeder and a tablet fed CalHypo slow erode tablet.
So my next question is going to be, what is in the normal CalHypo that we have out in our market, so what is the available chlorine that the CalHypo is going to come in for the service guys, mainly, that they can get at Superior or PWP or PEP?
So the CalHypo tabs, the residential CalHypo tabs, the NST, Pool Life NST non-stabilized tablets, they come in a 70% available chlorine. So, in comparison to trichlor, where you've got 99% trichlor, 90% available chlorine, the increase between those trichlor tablets and most of your 3-inch 8-ounce tablets and our 9-ounce NST tablets at 70% is that additional needed in a trichlor. A lot of that has to do with the fact that it is a stabilized tablet and you are introducing cyanuric acid into the equation. And when you introduce cyanuric acid into the equation, you always know that at some point you're going to get some loss in free available chlorine, because it's going to, as your CYA levels increase, it's going to start to bind up some of that chlorine and lock it up, obviously. And, we want to make sure that we're still getting a good free available chlorine, 1 to 4 parts per million when you're using trichlor tablets. And in order to do that, we have to have a higher strength of percentage of available chlorine to ensure that you've got that free available chlorine at 1 to 4 parts per million. Whereas with our non-stabilized tablet at 70% available chlorine, you're still getting a steady flow for 5 to 7 days in a skimmer or a feeder, and you're still getting about 4.6 parts per million of free available chlorine over the life of that tablet as a steady flow over the 5 to 7 days. Okay. So a similar experience.
Yeah. So what about your granular? What does that come in? Is that lower or that higher?
So the granular comes in different percentages just based on what you're purchasing. So at our service professional strength or your dealer strength, you're going to start out at the lower end of 68% available, and then it can bump up to 70% available, 73% available. That's the highest strength you're going to find in distribution or from other manufacturers that might be manufacturing CalHypo. And then, like I said, our strongest strength, our Pool Life Turbo Shock product, or in our Pool Breeze brand, our Top Shock product, that's a 78% available chlorine, and it's the strongest in the industry.
So now, is the 78% is that available at the distribution, or no? That's direct.
No, it's not. So again, it's something that we reserve for our direct customers only at this time. Okay. And it just gives them differentiation from everything else that's out there on the market that everyone else is manufacturing. And we usually hold that kind of technology. Same thing goes with the slow road tabs that we're going to talk a little bit more about as we get into this. We hold that for our direct customers. This is something that gives them some differentiation from anybody else out there. And again, the tabs can only be purchased directly. They can't be purchased through distribution. Although we do have a commercial tab that has some of that same slow road, slow dissolve technology for a commercial feeder that we have in distribution that you could certainly use. And I think when Alan was on, he talked about being able to use that tab in a skimmer situation for a residential pool as well.
If the guys are getting stuff at distribution, they're not getting these 70% ones. They're getting the ones that Alan was talking about.
So the ones that Alan were talking about. So when we make these slow road CalHypo tabs, we make it at the same plant that we produce our 78% CalHypo at. So when you're thinking about these tabs, even though they say they're 70% available chlorine, we're using our strongest strength CalHypo to manufacture these tablets. So in most instances, even though we claim 70% available chlorine, there's probably closer to 73, 74% available chlorine in these tabs, because we are using that highest strength CalHypo when we're pressing these tabs.
So my next question on CalHypo is, if I add 1 pound of CalHypo into a 10,000 gallon pool, how many ppms of free chlorine am I going to get?
So with our tablets, when we start out, when we have, especially when we have people converting from trichlor to these CalHypo tabs, our recommendation is to start out with one tab per 10,000 gallons. And then as you're seeing what your free available chlorine levels are, then you may have to boost it up to 2 tabs per week to service that 10,000 gallon pool. And like I mentioned, over the life of those tablets, you're going to see about a 4.6 part per million free available chlorine reading. And then as those tabs slowly dissolve and you get all the residual in the water, and based on bather load, environmental conditions, all those other things that we have to factor in to the equation, you'll see a slow decrease in your free available chlorine, unless, of course, you're adding more tabs over time. And again, starting out at 1 tab per 10,000, and then eventually it's probably going to be about 1 tab per 5,000 gallons to give you that nice, steady free available chlorine over the life of the tab.
So when I'm adding CalHypo, let's talk a little bit about powdered, because I think that's more of what the guys are looking for. And Billy, this question is for you. I was thinking about you when I came with this one. So when adding CalHypo into the pool, whether it's granular or powder, what is the best form to, or best way to add it into the pool? So is it going to be a skimmer? You're going to disperse it?
Yep. So just like any other chemical, you want to make sure the water balance is where it needs to be. And when we're talking about water balance for CalHypo, it's a exact 180 in terms of thinking as far as water balance is concerned. A lot of your guys that are watching and thinking about making the transition to CalHypo from dichlor and trichlor, most of them are used to using a very acidic product with that trichlor and dichlor. And because it's very acidic and it will tend to drive down the pH, they tend to want to run their pools at higher pH and total alkalinity levels, and use trichlor as kind of the buffer or to drive down the pH and get it into the range that gets you to your midpoint on your measurements. So if we're talking 7.2 to 7.8 and TA 80 to 120 parts per million for your ranges, when you're using trichlor and dichlor, you're tend to going to run those pools at 7.8 to 8 on the pH scale, and your alkalinity 100 to 120 parts per million, and then your trichlor, is the acidic property of that is going to tend to bring that down naturally as you introduce more trichlor and dichlor into the water. When we're talking CalHypo, we're talking the reverse thinking on that. CalHypo is high in pH. For instance, the granular or powder versions of CalHypo can run anywhere from 10 to 12 on the pH scale, depending on the strength of the CalHypo. And so because it's higher in pH, you're going to tend to want to run your pools and your total alkalinity at the lower ranges. So we talk about 7.2 to 7.4, with 7.3 being the sweet spot, so to speak, with pH. And for your alkalinity, you can run it as low as 60 to 80 parts per million, 100 on the high end, with 80 being kind of the target for your total alkalinity. And that will help out as far as when you're distributing CalHypo directly into the body of water, where you don't see a lot of that cloudy water issue. And the cloudy water issue with introduction of CalHypo into the water mostly has to do with water chemistry. Your pH is too high, and that calcium, when the CalHypo hits the water, the calcium is going to start coming out of solution a little bit and doing some of that cloudy water. It's going to clear up eventually, especially with circulation, because you're going to be running your pump when you're adding that CalHypo directly into the water. And if you got your pH and your alkalinity where you need them to be, then you tend to see a lot less of that cloudy water issue.
On a vinyl liner pool, can it just be thrown onto the vinyl liner and it'll be fine? Or
so obviously, with the vinyl liner, your biggest concern is that anything's going to settle at the bottom of the liner and start to do any staining or any damage to the liner. So when you're distributing CalHypo in, you want to make sure the ranges for CalHypo with the vinyl liner are a little different than, say, with your in-ground gunite, plaster pools. So we want the pH to be a little bit higher, so it does dissolve that granular CalHypo, that powder CalHypo, a little quicker, and you don't see a lot of the residue hitting the bottom of the pool. But brushing with CalHypo usage is something that you're going to be religious about as well, to get some of that residual that may make its way to the bottom of the pool to circulate and get some of that turbidity going to get that dissolve that we want to see, so we don't have any residual sitting on the bottom of the pool with those vinyl liners.
Okay. And I have a couple of guys asking about the amount of calcium added, and we're going to get into that in just a second, and I'm going to ask you that question. But guys, I want you to remember that in our industry, every product that you add to a pool has a byproduct.
Yep.
So nothing that we add to the pool does not have a side effect. Everything has a side effect, right? So if you add liquid chlorine, you're adding salt, you're adding TDSs. If you add trichlor, you're adding CYA to the pool. Same thing with CalHypo. It's going to have some things that you're going to have to work with. And I wouldn't necessarily tell you, okay, just because it adds calcium to the pool, are you automatically going to go, oh, that's not the product for me? Because if that's the thought process, then that should be the thought process with trichlor and dichlor. It's like, okay, that's too much CYA, so I can't use that. So I believe that CalHypo is a good product, guys. But just like I tell you with everything, you have to put a game plan in how you're going to manage that. So if you are using dichlor and trichlor, you have to put a game plan in place to be able to empty that water, because you're going to have to get rid of that CYA. And so everything is manageable. Just put a game plan in place. And I'll give you guys the example of what JJ from Flawless Pools, our guy from our podcast, are bringing us when it comes to water chemistry. And so one of the things that he does is he ordered some of these new CalHypo tabs. And what he's going to do is he's going to manage the pool with the CalHypo and the CalHypo tabs. If he sees that his calcium level starts to go up, then he can switch over to either liquid or, some tabs. And what can happen is he can extend the life of that water out. But that's the point, guys. The point is that you have to have a game plan and put a game plan in place to manage the products that you're using. And I believe that these tabs are definitely, a game changer, and it comes in a perfect time to be able to kind of go, hey, we're having an issue with these products. Let's make a change. Let's get educated on it and do it. And now's the perfect time to do that. So we're going to get into that. We're going to answer those questions with regards to the calcium level, guys. But you also have to remember that there's a lot of places where the calcium level coming from the faucet is really, really low. So Texas, it could be anywhere from 30 to 70 coming out of the faucet. So you can use CalHypo, and it's going to be really a long time before you start to have issues with calcium in the water, because your tap water is constantly coming in at that low level. So I'm going to answer those questions. I just saw you asking that question as we were going through, and I just kind of wanted to talk about it. Going back, Michael, next question is, does CalHypo go bad?
Does it go bad? I mean, everything has a quote unquote shelf life, when it comes to any chemical. It's got a half-life, it's got off-gasking that's happening. And so with our CalHypo, whether it's in the granular form or in the tableted form, obviously good storage where we're not putting in really high, wear conditions. If it's a really hot environment where it's being stored, if it's being stored in, direct sunlight for long periods of time, you're going to have some off-gassing. You're going to have those normal things that you would see that, degrade the strength of the product, number one. And number two, tend to lead to some off-gassing. So obviously, most chemicals out there, they're going to, recommend that you keep it in a cool, dry place to extend the life of it. But as far as CalHypo is concerned, 18 months to 2 years in perfect conditions where you're really, storing it properly, keeping it out of direct sunlight, keeping it out of those high heat conditions, or keeping it out of the elements as much as possible. You can see some real long shelf lives on the CalHypo before you see any real degradation of the strength. And in most instances, even at those longer periods of time, you may see, a loss of maybe 30% of the full strength of the product. But even in those situations, you'll still have some, reasonable free available chlorine readings using it as a shock product or in the tablet forms, where it's still viable to use it. You may just see that you're using a little bit more of the product as the product ages.
When I add 1 pound of CalHypo into a 10,000 gallon pool, how many ppms of my calcium hardness is going up?
Okay, so for every pound that you're using, you're going to add about 6 parts per million of calcium. So you mentioned, coming out of tap water in Texas, you can see anywhere from 30 to 70 parts per million. So you're probably going to do an addition of calcium chloride to bring your water up to a reasonable amount, so that you don't have aggressive water to start with. But as you are using CalHypo and you're using a pound of granular CalHypo to shock a pool, or with the tabs, where in this instance with our residential version, the tabs are 9 ounces, so they're a little bit more than a half a pound. If you're using two tabs a week, maybe in the beginning of the peak season, before it really starts to get hot and you have a higher bather load and more demand for chlorine, where you might be using 3 to 4 tabs a week. But in most instances where you're using 2 tabs a week, that's 18 ounces of product. So you're probably going to have between 6, 7, 8 parts per million of addition per 2 tabs of the CalHypo tabs. So if you think about that in relation to, let's say, in most of the Sun Belt, where we don't really have an off season, but obviously we have cooler temperatures, less usage. Over 52 weeks in a year, if you're using a pound to a pound and a half of these tabs, and you're talking 6 to 8 parts per million over 52 weeks out of the year, you're adding between 350, 400 parts per million a year. Whereas on the flip side of the coin, with trichlor or dichlor, you're adding about 6 parts per million of cyanuric acid per pound of trichlor or dichlor. And we know at the high range, 100 parts per million of cyanuric acid, and we're talking a pound of trichlor and a pound of dichlor a week, just to be safe. So with 2 pounds, with the dichlor and the trichlor combination, that's 12 parts per million per week. And in 8 weeks times 12, you're getting to 96 parts per million of cyanuric acid. So over a 2-month period, you're going to get to that level. If you start out at 0, so you've got, fresh fill, and you got 0 cyanuric acid, you're not adding any to start with, and you're just running your pools at with the trichlor and dichlor combo. After 8 weeks, you're going to be to that point where you've reached the high end, and you've got to start thinking about, well, do I just keep going on with it? Or do I start thinking about, partial drain and refill to bring it back down? Or do I just live with those high cyanuric acid levels and know that I'm going to have to throw more chemicals at the pool to keep, residual in the water and fight off algae when you start to get that lessening of the chlorine being able to do what it does. So, yeah.
And for you guys that are watching the Instagram Live, if you go back to our last podcast, we kind of got into detail about CYA and really kind of talked about how much it is that you need. And we also talked about it in one of our other Instagram Lives. So listen to it and listen to the amount of chlorine that you need to be able to shock a pool and treat it for algae once you're only at 100 parts per million. So listen to Bob Lowry and listen to him talk about that. It was actually pretty surprising. So next question that I have for you, Michael, on the CalHypo is storage. So we have Zach from the Pool Boys, and he is in Texas, and he's on the podcast with us. And he has a storage, and the storage is about 500 square feet that's enclosed. And then he has an outdoor area that's covered on 3 sides, but not the front. So what is the proper storage for somebody that has a whole bunch of pools and needs to store all the pool guys? They have like 10 pool guys. So how much can he store in his storages? And then what do you recommend storage-wise in the back of a truck?
Yeah, so every municipality is a little different. Every state, every county is a little different in terms of the regulation. So it's really hard to put a number on, the number of pounds that you could store in a enclosed space that's either sprinklered or non-sprinklered, or in the situation where you've got a 3-sided storage unit that's still got an open area. Ventilation is obviously a key as well. But if we look at, from a national perspective, when we look at the NFPI, the National Fire Protection Code, for a unsprinklered area, warehouse, whatever it may be, in most instances, 2,250 pounds is going to be the most CalHypo that you're going to be able to store in an unsprinklered situation. Whereas in a sprinklered situation, for the most part, the NFPI says that you can store up to 4,500 pounds in a sprinklered situation. Now, again, that may not necessarily jive with whatever is in that particular municipality or county or state regulation. So it's always important to get with, your local agencies and find out what the regulation is in that particular area where they're looking to store CalHypo. And obviously there's some separation, so we don't have incompatibilities with other chemicals if there are any incompatibilities. And again, you're going to get a lot of that from whoever your local municipality is to make sure that you're keeping a proper separation and you're keeping the proper ventilation. And again, whether it's a unsprinklered situation or a sprinklered situation where you know exactly how much you can store safely, whether it's in a retail environment or in a warehouse environment, so that you're staying within whatever the regulations are and not being out of code.
And then what do you recommend on the back of a pickup truck? So a lot of the guys who have we call independent guys, we service 80 pools. So what do you recommend on the back of the truck?
So a lot of these trucks, you're not placarding what you're carrying in the back of your truck. So it really comes down to common sense in terms of, again, storage and handling in the back of the truck. You certainly see guys rolling around with several buckets of trichlor in the back of their truck, maybe some dichlor granular in some buckets as well. And again, we know trichlor and dichlor has a little bit more minimal of a risk in the back of a truck than CalHypo. But again, it really goes to common sense and making sure that when you've got these buckets of CalHypo, whether it's a 25-pound bucket or a 100-pound bucket, that you're sealing the lid real well after you're done using it. And again, if you're in a situation where you're carrying around 1-pound bags of CalHypo, that you're not bringing back partially full bags of shock, and really using that full bag. Even in situation, even like with our 78% CalHypo, we recommend 1 pound of that per 15,000 gallons. But if you're using it in a 10,000 gallon pool, it certainly isn't going to hurt, using that full bag and getting a little bit more boost of chlorine, and obviously waiting for that to drop down to acceptable levels to get back in the water. But with that particular product, it dissolves so quickly, and it really starts to do the job so quickly that you're going to get the same experience that you would if you were using a 68% CalHypo in that 10,000 gallon pool, and having to wait for the same amount of time with pump run and circulation to get back into that pool. But again, as far as your question about carrying in the back of the truck, it really is safe handling and safe storage more than anything else.
So here's one of them. You're kind of a rep and a sales guy, so I'm going to pitch this one to you. So
sure. Why
would you say that CalHypo is better than any of the other choices for chlorine?
Well, I mean, it really comes down, everyone obviously has their preference. Trichlor and dichlor have been kind of the king in the industry in a lot of the areas of the country, just because of the ease of use. Guys know that the product's stabilized, and they're gonna get that protection from the sun. But obviously, the trade-off is cyanuric acid, and with CalHypo, the trade-off is the addition of calcium. But if we look at it from a sense of water chemistry, and especially around the Langelier saturation index, and I'm sure that Bob talked a lot about that, and what we can control with the Langelier saturation index as opposed to what we can't control. And we know that we can't control things like TDS or cyanuric acid levels by any adjustments to our pH or our alkalinity, where we can control calcium in the water with adjustments in pH and total alkalinity. And driving those down to lower ranges, and being able to control very high levels of calcium, where we can run pools. The high range for calcium in residential pools is 1,000 parts per million. In commercial pools, the Model Aquatic Health Code recently increased the high range on commercial pools to 2,500 parts per million. And a lot of that has to do with the education and the reintroduction for service guys, especially through a lot of the training that Bob is doing, whether it's on the residential side, with his plaster startup classes and using the Langelier saturation index as a guide when you're introducing calcium into the water, and being able to keep it in solution and not to have to worry about those cloudy water conditions or any scaling occurring that would lead to a bad experience with using CalHypo. But from a sanitization aspect, you're going to get that same sanitization experience that you're going to get with trichlor and dichlor, but the one difference that you will absolutely see with running CalHypo with pools is the clarity of the water. I don't know how many guys are watching this or how many will watch it through the recorded version that have used CalHypo in the past, and that's one thing that they will agree with, is the clarity of the water with CalHypo is so superior to trichlor and dichlor. Just because of that cyanuric acid component and how it leads to dull, cloudy water in a lot of the instances when you're running trichlor and dichlor pools. So from that perspective alone, I certainly would prefer CalHypo over trichlor and dichlor beyond just the CYA discussion itself.
Okay. And so why do you think that CalHypo is so popular in commercial pools? Because it's a lot more.
Well, a lot of it has to do with the ongoing regulation and the deep dive into cyanuric acid, and where it becomes a detriment, especially in commercial pools. And that has to do around the kill rates and the kill times for chlorine in the water at elevated cyanuric acid levels. And if from your commercial exposure to the business, that's a big issue in commercial pools, is making sure that we have enough free available chlorine to not only hold off algae, but also to make sure that we're getting good kill rates on anything that is introduced in the water that we don't want to be in there for long periods of time. And with elevated cyanuric acid levels, it's scientifically been shown that kill rates increase at higher levels of cyanuric acid. So using CalHypo in commercial situations and having non-stabilized introduction of chlorine into the water, you get to control the amount of cyanuric acid that's in the water, and you keep it in that range where it still is a benefit, but it doesn't become a detriment, and it's not locking up all that chlorine that you want and need to keep bacteria and algae away.
And so talking about that, and I'm going to throw this in for Alan and John, JJ, if you're watching, and Zach, if you're watching, I'm going to take an opportunity and plug it in. So I heard that you guys maintain the fountain at the Bellagio.
Yes.
And so we John, Zach, and I kind of volunteered ourselves to be able to go with him to check out that whole crazy back operation.
Oh, yeah.
That's going to be awesome.
Yeah, it's going to blow your mind. So obviously with the Bellagio, their first thought was, hey, look, we're going to run these fountains. We need this water to be as clear as possible, crystal clear. And the clarity, again, with CalHypo and running those huge pulsar feeders. And when you get a chance to see it, the operation there is second to none. I mean, it's world class in terms of the setup. And the clarity of the water in that in that large lake that they have, that light show and that that cannon show with the water getting shot out and everything. They're highly happy with running their CalHypo systems on those big huge feeders that are treating that large body of water and keeping it crystal clear. It's just amazing. So if you get a chance to do it, highly recommend it.
I just put our plug in to also put it in there because Alan said that he would take us. So and Mama is now saying that too. So I take every opportunity to remind Alan.
Well, hold him to it because he will definitely make it happen for you.
Great. So let's talk a little bit, and we're kind of starting to run out of time. So I really quick want to hit on a couple of things. And obviously we're talking about these CalHypo tabs. So the CalHypo tabs that you're talking about are only available direct. So if a pool guy wants to get their hands on that product, how could they do that?
So one of two ways. Obviously, we've got a dealer direct throughout the country that we sell these tabs to. So there may be an instance for them to find a dealer in the area where they're located where they can source the tabs directly from that dealer. And we tend to want to support our dealers and direct business their way. But in the instance where that's not an option, then we do have the option to sell the tabs directly to service customers. So with the understanding that there is limits to free freight. For the most part, a $2,500 purchase will get you free freight, and so in pallet, we sell them by the bucket, but the best bang for the buck, and to make that $2,500 limit, a couple of pallets will definitely get you over. If not, just one pallet, just depends on the size that you want to purchase to start out with. And then there's the two different versions of the tablets that we talked about before, where there's one that's intended for skimmer use only, and then the newer version of the tablets that can be used in the skimmer or the offline feeder, and they all come in different sizes.
Now, that second tab that you're talking about that's dealer direct is the one that have the sequestering agent in it. The other one doesn't, right?
Correct, yeah. So that's why, like I said, the first version that we came out with, it was intended for the skimmer. It didn't include the sequestering agent, but when we introduced the offline feeder that goes in tandem with this version 2, so to speak, of the tabs, that one does have the sequestering agent in.
And then on the email that you sent me with those two pamphlets, that's the one that's direct, right?
Yeah, so both the skimmer version and the offline feeder version, those are both the direct tablets. Those are the octagonal in shape, 9-ounce tabs that are blue in color, and when they hit the water, they turn bluer. And then the version that Alan was talking about that can also be used in the skimmer is our commercial version that comes in a 25-pound bucket. You can find that particular tab. It's circular. It's a 2 5/8 inch tab, so it looks a lot different than this residential tab that we're talking about right now. but it has that same slow road, slow dissolve CalHypo principle to it, pressed very similar to the octagonal shaped tabs. And you can source those through distribution warehouses that are carrying that 25-pound bucket in the brand is CCH Endurance tabs.
CCH Endurance.
Yep.
Okay. So definitely. And guys, if you have questions on this one that we're talking about, you can hit me on the DM and I will forward those 2 PDF files over to you so you can take a look at them. And you can hit me up and we'll get you Michael's information if you're interested. And we'll get through that. So if I was to try to compare the cost of those trichlor tabs, listen to me, of those CalHypo tabs to a bucket of trichlor tabs, what's the cost? Do you know?
Yeah. Well, so I can definitely tell you that the tabs are very competitive. If we're talking a 50-pound bucket of CalHypo tabs to a 50-pound bucket of trichlor tabs, as we speak right now, in some instances you may find that it's actually a better option price-wise. A 50-pound bucket of the version 2 tabs, the tabs that can go either in the offline feeder or the skimmer, is going to run about directly to a customer about $123, $124 for a 50-pound bucket. It's actually 49.4 pounds is the exact weight on that larger version. Around 123, 124 bucks for that biggest bucket. Most of the tabs that you're seeing out there, trichlor-wise, 50-pound buckets. You may see still some manufacturers selling it in the $90 for a 50-pound bucket, but for the most part, we're seeing through distribution and dealer direct anywhere from $110 to $130 for a 50-pound bucket. So now we're really talking about a real transformation in terms of the cost of a CalHypo bucket as opposed to a trichlor bucket, where it's very competitive, or in some instances maybe cheaper over the long run.
Yeah, and I'm really not even seeing 110 anywhere. Really kind of seeing anywhere from 130 to 150. And I think that's where it's going to land. And we've talked about it from day one when that plant caught fire and kind of what all the distributors were talking about, and the information that we were able to get is that it was really going to land anywhere from 120 to 150. We're kind of seeing it more south, than or north, obviously higher than the 110 and the 120. So, on these tabs that you're talking about, they can be used on the feeder and they can be used on the skimmer. And is there, for those tabs, storage-wise, just kind of the same thing as everything else, right? There's no special requirements.
And we made these as a class 2 oxidizer, which allows you to store a little bit more of the product. It's considered a little bit minimaler of a risk than your granular or your powder CalHypos, just because those are, they're made a little bit different. They have a higher oxidation classification or oxidizer classification. So storage of those tabs, again, it comes down to, all those common sense things that we talked about in terms of storage and handling, and the amount of pounds that you can store based on whatever your municipality or regulatory agency in the local market is directing you in terms of how much you can have in storage at any given time. So again, it really comes down to educating yourself on being able to store in your particular part of the country.
Michael, we are out of time, believe it or not. It's already been almost an hour. So
Yep.
I want to thank you for your time. I know that you're traveling with your boss. And I appreciate you taking time to stop and talk to us. We definitely need to talk about your laureates.
Absolutely,
so
yeah.
I am going to reach back out to you in the next couple of days. We'll talk about it, and then maybe right after the holidays, we'll kind of have you back and we'll talk about your new product for the laureates.
Sounds great. I'd love to be back.
All right, so I appreciate that. Thank you for your time, everybody. We'll see you next week. Next week is going to be on Tuesday, and thanks everybody for listening. Michael, once again, we'll talk soon.
All right, take care, everyone. Have a good night.
All right, bye guys.